Hey guys, it's Coach Herb. I just wanted to come to you today to talk about our next topic, which is going to be the rise of Europe's absolute monarchs. We are going to be studying this for a couple of weeks. You're going to have a big project that is due at the end of the unit right before the test. You'll have a study guide for it, and you'll have a good bit of notes that you'll be taking during this time. And luckily, you'll be at school for most of those days, so you'll be in front of me. You'll get to ask questions. But those of you that are not here on Friday, will need to view this video and get your notes. Um, a lot of the things that we've talked about in world history will lead to this point, whether it's exploration, the Renaissance, all those things. And, um, the beginning of the 1500s, several countries saw their leaders take on a new role. And if something is absolute, it means that it is all including everything. And that means these monarchs had all power. And the question that we kind of need to ask is, how much power should a leader have? How much power should these people have? And, when we think about our leaders today, we would probably want them somewhat limited. And obviously, we're having a big debate about it in this country right now. So it is very interesting. And it has a huge impact on the next couple things. And like I've told you, history is linear. So each thing kind of affects the last. As countries became more powerful through mercantilism, their leaders took on new roles. And as their leaders took on new roles, the people started to think differently. And so we're going to get into that today. But before we really get into the absolute monarchs of Europe, we need to understand what these people are and why it's important. And what we'll see is that during crisis, these leaders take on more power, and we've seen that in our country. Abraham Lincoln took on more power during the Civil War. President Bush took on more power during the Iraqi crisis. Even now during the COVID pandemic, President Trump has taken on more power. So this is important because this is what happened many, many years ago. This is not the first time we've seen it, and it's definitely probably not going to be the last time that we see it. But it's interesting for us to study these examples so that we can better ourselves in understanding what's going on in our day and age as well. So the first thing is the theory of absolutism. It's the idea that all political power should be centralized into one person, usually a king or a dictator. Like I said, this kind of comes about because of all the wealth that is coming in. A lot of decisions had to be made, and instead of consulting Parliament or a governing body like a Congress, there was none of this. And so political power, control of the country was centralized into one person. And usually it was a king or a dictator. We'll see some of these people soon. And like I said, they're not the first example. Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire was like this. Charles V was close to like this. He was a Habsburg king of, the Holy Roman Empire. And, we'll see this in other places. So it's just interesting to note that the theory of absolutism, this idea is all political power will be centrally located in one person, just one, singular, absolute monarch, an absolute king, an all-powerful king or dictator or queen. We'll see some of them. Some causes. Again, we always talk about the causes and things that we need to understand before happen. Well, the decline of feudalism in Europe, the decline of this idea of feudalism and the breaking apart of kings and kingdomships, knights and all those things in Europe that had been during the Middle Ages, that kind of dies off. And our time frame for this is somewhere around 1500 to 1800. And so, we need to keep that in perspective. This is following the Middle Ages. We haven't moved too far along in world history. We're kind of staying within the same boat all the time until we get, further down the road, and I'll let you know when that time period changes. Something else that causes this is the Reformation. The Reformation brought doubt to the Catholic Church, so people started to give more power to the governments. And as more power is given to the governments, you have the creation of absolute monarchs. Also, you have people like Henry VIII, who breaks from the Catholic Church and makes people follow him because he was the leader of the church in England and he was the leader of England. And so the Reformation had a direct effect on this. higher taxes by governments. As more money was coming in, and these expenses were coming about, they led to higher taxes. And so there was more money coming into the government to be used for different projects, exploration, building projects, and we'll see those in just a minute. Another cause was long wars. Something called the 30 Years' War will take place during this time. And because of these long wars, people get really tired and weary of war. War weariness is a real thing, and we do it too. We're excited in the beginning, and then we start to notice all the people dying, all the problems that it causes, the sacrifices that we have to make, and people get tired of it. And so long wars and really drag out the problems. And so what usually happens is an absolute monarch comes in to try to end the war and end the fighting and takes complete control as a way to stop the weariness of the war. Also, we had colonies. The colonies led to needing to have a more stronger central government. And the strongest type of central government is to have an absolute monarch, an all-powerful monarch that makes all the decisions. And so that came about because of colonies, as colonies needed someone to guide their ideas. And then lastly, you had the buildup of large armies. Now, you probably have one of the largest buildup of armies in world history, as at least until this point, because there were so many wars, and they built up their large armies to protect their borders. And because of that, you had a absolute monarch that can almost be unquestioned because of the size of their army. I mean, if you question them, they could just obviously take you out. And so this were the causes of absolute monarchs. Some characteristics of absolute monarchs, something claiming that these, almost all of these people that we'll talk about in the next couple of days will have these characteristics. So as you are taking your notes, kind of pay attention to these things, and that way we can understand that these are the characteristics they have. There wouldn't be an absolute monarch without these things. The claiming of divine right. Divine right means that people believe that, or the king or queen believes that they have been given power from God, that God has ordained them as the king or queen. And so with this, it kind of puts them in a place where they can't be questioned. You can't question something if God has done it. If God has given them the right to rule, then you can't really question these ideas. And so this claiming of divine right, that power has been given them to rule by God, makes them almost impervious to attacks from the public. Secondly, you'll see that almost all of them centralize power for themselves. They cut off the parliaments, they cut off the governing bodies, they cut off the people. No decisions are made outside of that person or really very close people to them. The third thing they do is they control the nobility, meaning that the people that have a lot of money, a lot of power, they control them, make them do what they want to do, whether that's financially, whether that's politically, or even just socially. We'll see that Louis XIV, he actually cuts them off from going places. He makes them live there with him. And this, again, is something that we've seen many times, especially like in Japan where they did this. And then the other thing that you will notice is almost all these monarchs will have large building projects for glorification. They're going to take those higher taxes, that money from exploration, and they're going to spend it. And it's going to be very ornate, huge building projects. One of those that we'll study for sure is the Palace of Versailles. And so those are some of the characteristics of absolute monarchs. What we're going to do today is also get into Philip II. Philip II was an absolute monarch from Spain. And Philip II got his kingdom, or received his kingdom, from Charles V. Charles V was a relative of Charles V, is actually his son, and he gave him the kingdom of Spain. And so he becomes a king of Spain in 1556. And he was very shy, and like his father, deeply religious. He would be the defender of Catholicism. He, of course, we talked about it during the exploration, age of exploration, they've gained great wealth from the New World colonies. He uses something called the Inquisition to drive out Protestants from Spain and from the surrounding areas. Uh, they investigated suspected heretics or non-believers in Christianity, and he believed it was his duty to defend Catholicism against the Muslims of the Ottoman Empire and the Protestants of Europe. And he was all about it. And so this is how he kind of gained even more power and more respect in his kingdom. He brings about a golden age of Spanish art and literature by spending money. People like El Greco and Velázquez painted things that we still talk about today, different paintings. And then you have the publication of Don Quixote, which is one of the novels that you'll probably study in high school that we, again, still study today. So that some of these artists and some of these writings come about during this time and, really create this power influx into Philip II. He also created what was called the Invincible Armada. Of course, as leading the way in exploration, their shipbuilding was almost flawless, and they created this huge navy that would be almost unbeatable. We'll see that had a couple wrenches in there. The Spanish Armada, like I said, considered the Invincible Armada, was a huge asset to Philip II. And so just some of the things there that he has done to provide himself as the absolute monarch of Spain. Just in consider of his wealth, by 1600, American mines had supplied Spain with almost 339,000 pounds of gold, 16,000 tons of silver, and with his wealth, he supported a large standing army of 50,000 soldiers. So he's got 50,000 soldiers just for him. He's pretty powerful at this point, but he had some downfalls. And so the downfall begins with inflation and taxes. What is inflation? Inflation is when your money becomes less valuable. And so one of these problems of inflation is through the prices of goods and services. Two things that caused this to happen. First, Spain's population had been growing and growing and growing. And as more people demanded foods and goods, merchants were able to raise prices. Second, the silver that had been found in the New World flooded the market and its value dropped. As there was more of it, silver kind of lost its value, and people needed more and more amounts of silver to buy things. We'll talk about inflation later, and it causes a lot of problems. You can't just add money to the money supply and hope that it'll fix it. It drops the value. But Spain's economic problems had more than just those two causes. When they expelled the Jews and the Muslims, they lost valuable artisans and businesses. In addition, the nobles did not have to pay taxes. So the nobles didn't have to pay taxes. The only people that were people that didn't have money. And so the tax burden fell on the lower classes. And this provided a kind of a continual problem that they couldn't create businesses. As they were having to pay so many taxes, they couldn't create businesses, which it led to less jobs and more problems. Okay, so the money was a big issue there. They never developed a middle class in Spain. Also, people started buying stuff outside of the areas. They started to buy stuff outside of Spain, and so there was more imports than there were exports. So they were buying more things from other countries, and their money was going outside of the country than staying in the country. And so that was an issue. Secondly, a bunch of revolts happened in conquered lands as they had conquered the Dutch. Spanish Netherlands revolted against him. The Dutch continued to fight the Spanish for 11 years. Finally, in 1579, the northern provinces of Netherlands, which were largely Protestant, this is what the fight was over. He was Catholic, they were Protestant, they were fighting against it, became united, and he had to give in to them, and they became the independent Dutch areas, the independent Netherlands. In building up their trade empire, like we talked about during the age of absolutism. Again, I already talked about the Spanish buying goods abroad. And one of the biggest things is he had the Invincible Armada. Well, in 1588, they are battling the English because remember, the English are Protestants. And so they trek around through into the English Channel, and it's terrible. The English Armada, who was not more powerful than the Spanish Armada, the Invincible Armada, they were defeated by the English because of some luck. In the summer of 1588, he sent 130 ships carrying 19,000 soldiers to the English Channel. However, they were outmaneuvered, and a storm blew in and knocked. They didn't know the coastlines where they were, and so they were knocked into the shore and almost all destroyed. They would sail around the islands for a time, and some would make it back. But this destruction of the Invincible Armada was kind of the last step in the downfall of Philip II. And so we see his lavish lifestyle and this buildup of this navy sounds great, but it didn't really lead to anything more than that. Trying to look, make sure I didn't leave anything out. The English and their unconventional tactics basically made it so that the Spanish Armada was ineffective. They used fire ships, and they kind of just kept bombarding them with artillery, and the Spanish weren't ready for this. They were ready for a naval battle, Navy ships versus Navy ships, and they weren't ready for the English to use their geographical resources against them. And what happened is this storm kind of saved the day for the English and destroyed the Spanish kingdom. That's where we're going to stop for today. Make sure you have gotten all these notes and taken these down on your own paper. There's no guided notes sheet, so you got to write down all these things. And do your exit ticket. Your exit ticket is if you were writing a quiz for this information today, what 2 questions would you include on it, and then answer those questions. So it's like you're making a quiz for this unit. What would you add to it, and how would you answer those questions? So if you have any questions, make sure to email me, and otherwise, have a great day.